Welcome to our evening session on bison in Montana. I'm Sarah Bates with the National Wildlife Federation, here with a few of my colleagues from the office and with our co-sponsors, the Montana Wildlife Federation, Hellgate Hunters and Anglers. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the law school and to Professors Monty Mills and Maylin Smith for hosting us, and Sandy Zelmer being here as well. Thank you to our speakers for coming in, extra distance from your flight into Kalispell, coming down here. We appreciate it. We'll do a little introductory conversation here to set the context for the presentation tonight. So most Americans and many people from all around the world are familiar with the tragic story of how vast herds of the plains bison were hunted to the brink of extinction in just a few decades in the 19th century, a dark period in our history. Bison weren't the only species that were subject to this wasteful and uncontrolled market hunting. By 1900, all of Montana's big game species were nearly wiped out. Fortunately, in the early 20th century, with the formation of new organizations, including the National Wildlife Federation, and leadership from people like Theodore Roosevelt and George Bird Grinnell, we restored important wildlife species like elk, bighorn sheep, deer, and pronghorn to their native habitats. The one big game species that we have not accomplished this significant restoration is the bison. In a desperate effort to save the last, the wild bison, from extinction, private citizens cooperated with others to capture those animals and hold them for protection. Their status today as wildlife is confusing to members of the public and to professionals because they're routinely managed as livestock. Today, the largest wild roaming herd of bison with about 3,000 animals, as many people know, is in Yellowstone National Park. The second largest wild free-roaming herd of bison is in the Henry Mountains and the Book Cliffs of Utah, which is the subject of the presentation tonight. Over the past decade, the National Wildlife Federation has been working with other conservation organizations, with tribal partners, and with scientists to ecologically restore bison to their native habitats on the plains within their historic range. To provide some context for tonight's presentation, we're going to show a short video that illustrates the promise of bison recovery within the North American wildlife management model, strongly tied to engagement with the hunting community. And then, after my colleague Kit Fisher brings us up to speed with the planning process here in Montana for recovery of bison, we'll turn this over to our speakers who came in from Utah, Bill Bates and Dax Mangus from the Utah Division of Wildlife. Again, I'd like to thank the University of Montana for hosting us here, our co-sponsors for bringing this together, and I'd also like to thank the Missoula Community Access Television for taping this so that we can share it with others later, and for the media assistant grant that made that possible for us. So while the video is getting teed up, I'd like to mention that those of you that don't know, tonight is the prologue for a day-long conference that's happening tomorrow in Polson that we're co-sponsoring with the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. And this will be focused on the restoration of bison on the Great Plains with a special emphasis on the role of tribes and tribal partnerships in making that happen. So here we go.
My name is Jim Posowitz, and I have been living, hunting, and fishing in Montana for well over a half century. The Lewis and Clark expedition described the wildlife resource that they found here as something that exceeded anything the eye of man had ever looked upon. These hills were covered with bison. There were elk, antelope, deer, The wildlife resource that once lived here went through a very dark period. They were killed for hides, tongues, and just for the sake of removing them from the landscape. We had reduced that resource to nothing but a pile of bones. And out of that darkness grew the hunter conservationist movement. The hunters of America sought to end the commercial use of wildlife and began instilling a conservation ethic in our culture. And as a result, we have elk restored through reintroductions in the 50s, bighorn sheep in the 1980s. The antelope and deer populations from the remnants have grown up to a new wonderful abundance. And when Theodore Roosevelt was in the White House, there were about 5,000 elk left in Montana. There are now 150,000 elk in the state of Montana. The entire pyramid of wildlife that was once here is almost all back, but we're short one species: wild, free-ranging, huntable buffalo. The idea of neglecting the restoration of buffalo, I think, would be inexcusable at this phase in the evolution of the hunter conservation movement. And there's probably no better site in North America than the C.M. Russell Wildlife Refuge to begin the restoration of wild buffalo. It's a vast million-acre tract of public land just simply waiting for these animals to come back. The landscape here is much the same as it was when the bison were extirpated by the commercial slaughter. We have shown that we can restore elk, we can restore bighorn sheep, and the idea of adding bison to the list of species that can be hunted here as wild, free-ranging animals, this is an exceptional opportunity. And we not only have an opportunity to expand the hunting options that we can pass to the future generations, but we also have a moral responsibility. This was the most abused animal on the continent, and we have a chance to correct that. All through American history, it's been the sportsman-hunter that has carried the conservation ethic forward and restored wildlife to an entire continent. Wildlife conservation began in America when Theodore Roosevelt set us on that course, and it's going to be up to the sportsman to get behind it, to bring that last animal back to where it belongs on this landscape.
So I'm Kit Fisher, as Sarah mentioned, with National Wildlife Federation. I'm also president of Hellgate Hunters and Anglers, our local rod and gun club. And as Jim Posowitz, who I think many of you here know, he has been a champion of wildlife restoration in the state, and he's put in a lot of time and energy into bison, as many of us have as well. And in terms of the context for where we're at in Montana, which is a different situation that we're going to hear shortly about Utah, you know, Montana has fallen behind in many ways in terms of what opportunities we haven't realized for bison recovery. And why that has occurred, you know, we could point fingers at politics, we can point fingers at Yellowstone Park in some ways, I think has proved a challenging example when we look at bison restoration on public lands. As many of us know, Yellowstone Park has been, you know, for decades, as bison have come out of the park, there's been capture, test, and slaughter related to issues with brucellosis. And I think that those same concerns have transferred to other bison populations outside of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. The fears in the livestock community around disease, perhaps somewhat of a red herring in some circles, that disease issue, but it is a major concern for livestock interests. So as we talk about other populations, how we can be restoring populations, you know, we have to, it's not just putting them there and hoping it all works out. The social aspect, the politics are all something that's weighing in. The state of Montana 6 years ago started a statewide bison restoration effort led by Arnie Dude with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And this was a phenomenal effort with outreach across the state, working with ranchers, sportsmen, tribes, thinking about how we can start this opportunity fresh. And I think we've gotten a long ways in Montana thinking about, where and honing that down, which I think has been a lesson in itself. As many of you remember, Governor Schweitzer was very enthused about seeing bison on Spotted Dog Wildlife Management Area over by Deer Lodge. Well, that inflamed ranchers over by Deer Lodge. Many of us at the same time in the conservation world were thinking, God, out of all places, I don't know if Spotted Dog is really the place we want to fight for. And so there's been different small efforts and different cadre of conservation interests, of tribal interests, sportsman interests, looking at where in the state we can really realize that effort, where there is a shared resource of bison that, would satisfy all of our interests, that we could see success somewhere on the landscape in sort of this ecological level, and when we're looking at bison restoration, we really think 1,000 animals for ecological significance, for genetic significance is really the number that we want to hit. And there's few places in Montana where that opportunity exists. And as you saw in the video, if none of you have been out to the Charles M. Russell National Wildlife Refuge, it's a phenomenal landscape. There's a lot of public land out there. And it's, for a shortgrass prairie ecosystem that's intact in much the way it was several hundred years ago, it doesn't get any better than that. And I think, as we look forward, we're not limiting ourselves to one landscape or one group or one tribe to work with on this. I think it's really a Montana interest that we all have to get together and say, okay, how can we carve out a piece of Montana and work with the livestock interests, the landowners, to figure out how to move this forward. And I think an important lesson, and why we've invited Utah Division of Wildlife. We have Bill Bates here and Dax Mangus that will now give us a presentation of how they got this done and how it's working in Utah, that I think can prove a valuable model as we continue to fight for a place in bison in Montana. So welcome.
Thanks, Kip. I guess I get to go first. I guess we don't have a clicker, do we? Or yeah, we do right here. Okay, good. I can walk. So I guess there we go.
Maybe I'm first, though.
Okay, Dax is going to go first. Put down here, okay. Get us going. Yeah.
All right, well, thanks so much. Nice to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about bison restoration efforts on the East Towcliffs Plateau or Book Cliffs area. This is a more recent bison reintroduction effort. Just really the last decade is where we've been working here. You can see on this map here, kind of in the northeastern portion of the state. The Henry Mountains is down here. We're in Colorado Plateau, ecotype here, elevations 1,200 to 2,800 meters. It's fairly arid. There's a limited amount of that summer range. This area we're working with is about 1.4 million acres, and about a third of that, a little more than a third of that, is the Hill Creek extension of the Ute Indian Reservation, the Northern Ute tribe. And so you can see on the map here, this kind of pink blob here, that's Ute tribal lands. So there's really been a cooperative effort working with the tribe. We talked a little bit about the history of bison and how these large numbers of these animals have been decimated through market hunting and also as a means to really try to constrain native peoples to reservations and as a strategy in the Indian War to to keep the Native Americans from causing trouble, quote unquote. Bill told me something earlier today that he had heard from a tribal leader that to them, bison are their church and their Walmart. And it's true. And when they got rid of the bison, they were kind of stuck. They were stuck on those reservations. As a species, bison, they're listed by the IUCN as near threatened. In the state of Utah, they're listed as a species of concern in our wildlife action plan. Most population viability analyses suggest you need at least 1,000 animals. And they're species that require some intensive management. That's some of the things we've learned in Utah, that they're kind of high maintenance sometimes. The future of bison, I think is bright, though. They've recently been designated as the national mammal. There's more interest and there's some momentum to do some more things with bison. And I hope that some of the lessons we've learned in Utah can help. And I don't think we know everything. We're still learning. But I hope that some of the things we've learned can help address these challenges. And I think a really big component of that is bringing together these diverse groups of people that have a common interest. In the Uinta Basin, which is kind of that northeastern portion of Utah where I'm at there, the Book Cliffs area, Father Escalante documented harvesting of bison in that area in 1776. We've got Native American rock art pictographs depicting bison. Some bison skulls were recovered in this area, so it's really a reintroduction rather than an introduction. The restoration efforts began with the Ute tribe. In 1986, the tribe introduced a handful of animals on the Hill Creek extension of the Ute Reservation and followed that up with some supplemental releases after that initial release. And as the population began to grow and expand on tribal lands, we start to see more and more animals that would show up on adjacent, mostly BLM lands near the Ute tribe lands. And so in the early 90s, biologists from the Division of Wildlife and some folks from the BLM, they were out, and where most good ideas come from, they were sitting around a campfire late at night and throwing out wild ideas, and they said, what if we managed the Book Cliffs area for bison? And they really thought, how do we take an ecosystem function approach to managing this area? What can we do to help the Book Cliffs realize its potential and be what it could be? And from this conversation, the ball started rolling, and before they knew it, they had purchased several large private ranches. They acquired the private acreage along with the livestock AUMs, the grazing allotments on federal lands associated with those ranches. It was a big process. It wasn't without controversy. There were some folks that didn't necessarily love it, but generally there was support. And they met with the BLM, and they figured out some ways to kind of redistribute large ungulate herbivory in a way to make room for more wild ungulates, including, you guessed it, bison. So, after that Book Cliffs conservation initiative process, where they purchased those lands and did the rearranging of the AUMs, there was a period of time the division was involved in a lawsuit regarding elk. And, there was some opposition to this and people that weren't really comfortable with it. So when they put together the committee to write the species management plan, the Book Cliffs Bison management plan, it was an arduous process and it was contentious. And there were some big concerns. That portion of Utah, that northeastern corner of the state, is the #1 producer for both crude oil and natural gas. And so, that was one of the big concerns, in addition to the concerns from the livestock community, was, are bison going to prohibit energy development? And there were some concessions made, and in the management plan, that was one of the things that we agreed to, was to not let bison restoration efforts have an undue impact on economic development related to energy extraction. The plan was approved through our wildlife board in 2007 with a population objective of 450 adult bison post-hunting season. We started with introduction efforts. We got the initial 15 animals that we started our reintroductions with from the Ute tribe. They were donated by the Northern Utes. And then we followed that up the next couple years. 30 animals from the Henry Mountains, and then the next year another 41 animals from the Henry Mountains. When we brought the 41 from the Henrys, release sites became a little bit of a sticking point. We had the initial release sites outlined in the management plan, and we thought that the subsequent release would not have to necessarily be so formal and stick to those initial release sites. At that point, it was a supplemental release, not an initial release. But we got some pushback, and so we had to stick with the initial release locations. Well, we captured the bison in January. We just happened to have a horrible snow year. And Army Dude from Montana actually came down with me and hung out for a couple days. Let's see if he'll... This is me in my truck following two D7 cats and a road grader trying to get to our release sites. And I about died that winter. We fought it for a couple weeks. We'd get the road cleared, and the next day it would drift back in. And I lost my voice. That's when I learned to text, because I lost my voice and I couldn't call people. So I credit this event for when I learned to, I transitioned. I'm in that generation where I'm right in between. I learned to text because I lost my voice. We finally gave up and said, okay, I guess we're waiting until spring. We only had 40 animals. We ended up releasing 41 because one of them had a calf before we released him in the spring. But we got them out there. So we thought, all right, this is great. We've got these animals out. You know, we released 81 animals or 80 animals. We can sit back and relax and watch them grow. Well, the next summer, maybe you can see we've got just a handful of bison down here. They're hanging out. That river is the boundary where the bison are not supposed to cross. And so our eating animals turned into about 300 animals in 1 year. And what happened was I think we had a lot of animals that started leaving Ute tribal lands. And we had bison on private lands. We had bison going across the border into Colorado. We had bison crossing the river onto adjacent units where we didn't have a bison management plan in place. So our period of time where we were going to sit back and enjoy watching these bison grow, it was cut short. Here we are. There's a couple of my biologists down trying to push some bison out of some private fields, and we got into the controversy right off the bat. There wasn't really a sit back and relax period. We tried a lot of things to deal with bison and ended up in places where we didn't want them. We did some aerial herding, and some of the time the aerial herding worked pretty well. We were able to herd the bison. Some of the times it didn't. Here's one that didn't work so well. We hovered there for quite a while, and eventually we left. He won that stare down. So, and even some of the animals that we were able to successfully herd, within a couple weeks they were back. So we realized herding was expensive and marginally effective. We were going to have to try some other things. And this is where hunting really came in and became a really valuable and helpful tool for us in managing these bison and dealing with some of these conflicts. We had our first hunt in 2011, so just a couple years after we finished with the releases. And we actually didn't even have that hunt on the Book Cliffs unit. We had it on the neighboring unit across the river. We started our first hunts on the unit in 2012, and we set up our hunt boundaries to specifically target some of these late season migration areas where we were having problems with bison coming and then leaving into areas we didn't want them. These were some new ideas. They were different than how we typically managed hunting bison in the Henry Mountains. An opportunity to hunt bison is really coveted in Utah. They're a once-in-a-lifetime species. You only have an opportunity to draw a tag once in your life. And we had to try some things that we maybe weren't super comfortable with, that were different than what we had originally wanted to do. Another thing that was a little bit tricky with this was a lot of these animals that we were hunting had originated on Ute tribal lands and then migrated off the Ute tribal lands. And this kind of put us in a tough spot with the tribe. We had worked together really well as partners, but they didn't necessarily see ownership and jurisdiction the same way we did. I could sit down with our Attorney General and he'd tell me exactly what state code said and whose bison they were and who had management authority. And then when I went and met with the Ute Tribal Council, they didn't see it the same way. And I think there just were some cultural differences of how we looked at bison and whose they were and who had the authority to manage them. And it's a challenge. And I think having a good relationship with the tribe and working together with them was a key that helped. But I'll be honest, there still are some folks in the tribe that are not happy with us hunting bison the ways that we hunt them sometimes. I think there are a lot of people in the tribe that understand what we're doing and why we're doing it and are supportive, but there are definitely some critics too that aren't super comfortable with it. And so it's a tricky one, and I think having that relationship with the tribe and continuing to communicate with them and help them understand the situation that we're in and what we're up against has helped. So, we've got bison coming off Ute lands, we've got one into Colorado. In Colorado, they're not recognized as wildlife and can be shot on site. We had bison, multiple bison that have crossed the state line and been harvested. We've got bison that are crossing the river, the Green River, to adjacent units. And we've got, like I said, mixed success with herding, and we tried some outside the box ideas, and I think we've had pretty good success using those ideas to deal with some of these tricky situations we ran into. Those are our challenges off the unit. On the unit, where we have the management plan in place, we have some challenges there as well. Some of the landowners and grazers that were initially really supportive, they've had some concerns, and they've been concerned. It's a relatively arid unit, pretty dry, so concerns over forage, over water. Bison that spend time on private lands, they're hard on fences, and so we're working through those issues, and we're taking a lot of steps to address them. In the Book Cliffs, just in the last 5 years, we've done over 16,000 acres of habitat improvement. Most of that has been funded through our Watershed Restoration Initiative, which is a cooperative effort between the Division of Wildlife Resources, our state legislature, sportsmen's groups, and the Federal Land Management Agency and other partners. We've done a lot of projects to increase the quality and quantity of forage available to both wildlife and livestock on the unit. Water development has also been a big one. Right now in the Book Cliffs, I think we have 84 guzzlers with big supplementary aprons to help us catch even more water. We've got 130,000 plus gallons of storage capacity in those guzzlers. And this year alone, we're putting in 18 additional guzzlers, another, I can't remember, it was 20 or 30,000 gallons of storage capacity. So, water's been a big one. And it helps when we meet with the landowners and the permittees that are having a hard time with bison. We can show them these efforts that we're making and the progress that's taking place. And I've got a whole lot of trail camera photos of Black Angus drinking out of tanks and other guzzlers too. So it's not just bison. One of our other challenges, this was kind of an interesting one, they paved a major road right through the middle of the unit, and we had a little bit of roadkill. We've got some bison. This guy in this truck right here hit and killed 6 bison in one vehicle collision. So, that one kind of broke our hearts a little bit. But it's not all sad news. We've also documented bison use of an underpass, a wildlife crossing structure, which to my knowledge is the only documentation of bison using an underpass. So maybe you guys have seen something in Montana. We saw a cool overpass today driving down from Kalispell, but we've got bison trail camera going underneath the road through an underpass. Feral cattle and wild horses are an issue in the Book Cliffs as well. The populations just seem to continue to increase. This has been a big issue on Ute lands, and the tribe is making some extra efforts to try to do some feral cattle roundups and also to deal with the horse population. It's a growing problem. It's an issue that we have some concerns about. The BLM has done some horse roundups and made some really token efforts, but we're not seeing progress in managing feral livestock and wild horse populations. And it's a concern for the future, what's going to happen if we continue to not be able to effectively manage those populations. Some of the lessons we're learning and that we learned from working on bison issues in the Book Cliffs, partnerships is key. Working with these folks that are passionate and come from diverse backgrounds, folks that are interested in bison from a conservation standpoint, folks that are interested in bison from a hunting standpoint, folks that are interested in healthy rangelands, and we're trying to find a common ground between these groups of diverse stakeholders. And then we've got to take meaningful actions. When we see a problem starting to happen, we have to get after it. And even if it means doing some things that we're not totally comfortable with, or that we maybe haven't done in the past, I think that's key to building that trust, is showing that we're willing to be responsive to these concerns and take these actions and address the issues that people are starting to see. You know, one of the key take-homes is don't expect bison not to be bison. If there's a landowner that's really unfriendly to bison and he has a nice alfalfa field right next to the CMR, you know, the bison are going to go there. They're gonna do some of those things. So just be prepared for it, be ready for it, and be willing to be responsive and get after it when bison are bison. And they're gonna do some of those things. They're the poster child for adaptive management. You know, seeing what's happening, doing your best, and then when things don't work out exactly how you maybe want them to, making adjustments and trying again. So I think the future of bison is bright. I think it's challenging, but I think that makes it even more rewarding. I think one of the keys is to show we can do it right, and to show that we're going to be responsive. And we're not going to ignore the issues or just give them lip service. We're going to take meaningful action. That's going to help us build support, and I hope that maybe some of the things we've done in Utah can help you guys build some support in Montana. And, you know, again, you can't overemphasize the importance of forming these diverse coalitions, these groups of stakeholders. And don't be afraid to sit around a campfire and dream. And that's what I have for book cliffs restoration.
We may need to reload a few slides for the other presentation.
Somewhere. It's not Halloween.
Yeah. Got a big picture behind you. Maybe there's a question or two specific to
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So, Oscar Wyatt got bought out, the new landowner, was he easier to work with than Oscar was?
Yes, but we still got some issues, but he's not, we're not in court with that reason. He's not suing us like Oscar sued us, so it's a little better.
Good. Is he open to the bison, or is he pushing like Oscar did on the elk?
They're okay. I think one of the things we're seeing is that some of the landowners and permittees, they want an opportunity to, you know, maybe get some bison permits that they could sell or something. That's the push, I think, is. And you know, we emphasize and show them the range improvement projects we're doing, the water projects we're doing that are on their permits, and we have to kind of remind them sometimes that there is a lot of money being reinvested back into the area that helps them and helps their operations. But sometimes we have to remind them that they decide they want a piece of the bison pie sometimes.
So what's the total population and what do you think it can sustain?
So our objective is 450 adults postseason. Right now, we're about 350. We're hunting them, you know, this year I think we increased our cow permits to 25 permits, our bull permits to about 25 permits. So we're starting to hunt a little more, even though we're not quite to that objective. But I think the idea is we would like to kind of slowly ease into it and see. You know, when we set the objective, you're in a meeting, you're sitting down, you're looking at numbers on paper. When you actually get animals on the ground, sometimes you realize the numbers on the paper maybe are a little trickier. And so, you know, I think we can probably get there to that 450. One of the wild cards here is what happens on tribal land. So right now, the Ute tribe estimates their bison population at about 650. So, and there's a lot of interchange. The animals move back and forth. You know, the bison don't necessarily stay on you know, state administered lands or the tribal administered lands. So I mean, we're probably looking at 1,000 plus animals in this kind of meta population. But that makes it a little bit tricky for us when we're asked what our population estimate is, and that depends on what time of year and how much snow we've had and what migration is looking like. But I think that 450 is realistic if the tribe continues to manage their population about where it's at. But they sometimes change their mind with what they want to do with their numbers.
What specifically did the planning process look like between you guys, the energy companies, the ranchers, and the tribes? Were there one-on-one meetings or two?
It was a committee, it was a group, and sometimes the meetings went for hours and hours and hours and not much got accomplished. It was rough. I was really lucky. I stepped in right after they finished the planning process. I just got to do the sexy part and let Bison go out on the ground. But they were pretty brutal. There were some brutal meetings and some shouting matches. But eventually, I think, like I said, they made some concessions with regard to energy development. And then the fact that, we don't typically allocate federal AUMs for wildlife, that's something that I think makes us a little bit uncomfortable. But in this process, through that Book Cliffs Conservation Initiative, the purchase of those private ranches and the associated AUMs, we worked with the Vernal BLM district, and they incorporated that in their RMP and the revision of their RMP. And so I think that helped quite a bit too. So there were still some reservations, but basically in the plan it says we will not allow bison to be a hindrance to energy development activities.
And is the current relationship between you guys, is it?
It's good.
Yeah.
And most of the energy development activities at this point anyways are occurring in lower elevations where we don't have as much bison use, but there's going to be more and more in the upper elevations where we have more bison use. But I don't foresee any huge conflicts there with the energy development sector.
Were the meetings that you talked about with the diverse stakeholders, did the department hire an outside facilitator, or department try to facilitate them themselves? I mean, how are they managed a little bit?
We had our own facilitator. It was not the way you would normally do things, but we just we had one of our employees do it. Okay. Thanks, Dax. Okay, I'm not as technologically savvy or speak as loud as Dax, but I sure appreciate him coming and appreciate his passion. And Clint Sampson, who's a biologist out in the Book Cliffs, they are a great team, and they are just doing great things for Bison. Clint always, when we go out and do our surveys or whatever, he was the one you saw a minute ago with the helicopter behind him, the big smile on his face. He always says, "Be the Bison." Anyway, just a little bit about me. I've been involved with bison for a long time. My father, Jim Bates, was a wildlife manager in Price when I was just a kid, and he was involved in some of the stuff we'll talk about back in, was in 1962, went to Price, was involved in things there, so he's involved with the Henry Mountains herd, and the last major message he got to me before he passed away was, "Don't let them mess up my bison herd." So he was really passionate about it. My brother, Steve, is the wildlife biologist at Antelope Island in Utah, and they also have a bison herd out there. So something we care a lot about. But my talk is going to be about the Henry Mountains, but also more on a general basis about, can bison be managed by the states as wildlife? And before we started, Kip asked a question about should be the federal role in bison restoration. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit, maybe have some questions about that, but let's kind of go through this a little bit. Like Dak, so I wish we were really sitting around a campfire, just think we were out at the National Bison Range, with a nice little fire there, and thinking about kicking ideas around. That's kind of where ideas get started and where things get done. And that's the kind of feelings and emotions that you have when you're meeting together like that, are the kind of emotions that are needed in this effort. Anyway, the subtitle for my talk tonight would be, "Can we take the fences down?" So let's take a close look at the Department of Interior's bison portfolio. As you may be aware, they had, I think it was in 2012, they came out with a major initiative called the Ecological Restoration of Bison. So they currently have 19 herds in 12 states on Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, and BLM lands. They have the majority of those are fenced. 13 bison herds numbering about 32 animals, exist on about 2,008 acres. Last 2 weeks, I've been able to go to both the National Bison Range and Wichita Mountain National Wildlife Refuge. And I'm just here to tell you today, you have something different than we have, and we have something different than you have. And if we could combine the two together, we'd probably have what would work for ecological restoration of bison. So, with free-ranging herds right now, there are 6 bison herds on Department of Interior lands, numbering about 7,000 animals, but that's on 4.4 million acres. So just look at that difference in magnitude of the number of acres and the amount of raw space that's required. And I guess I didn't mention, in 2013 at the American Bison Society meetings up in, I guess we were at Big Sky, and I was part of a working group that was given the question to answer, can bison restoration achieve balance between management practices that encourage key ecosystem processes and the intense husbandry practices used today to satisfy social and economic pressures? Now we have a wide spectrum of bison management. At the National Bison Range, they have about 300 animals. I'm not sure the number of acres that they have, about 13,000, 15,000, I don't know for sure. But kind of small from a landscape size, but 300 animals compared to what we have is about the same as the Henry Mountains. But they have very intense management. So what we decided to do was put together this really rough graph. And Glenn Plum, if any of you know him, he's a great guy, was the Park Service chief wildlife biologist, was in Fort Collins for many years, just retired this last year. This was his brainchild, but we graphed different bison behaviors against both space and time. So you have things like, let's see, does this work? Oh, there's probably a laser I'll shoot myself with. Anyway, things like patch herbivory, aggression, random movements, it doesn't take a lot of space or time to do those things, but group size, these are the different ecological processes that bison have. The rut, then we start looking at population demographics of, natural selection of mates. Some of these national wildlife refuges, they determine which bulls breed with which cows because they're doing endogenetic management. And, trying to maintain a species, that's probably important. But dispersal, migration, gene flow, some of those things take a lot of space and a lot of time. So looking at it further, you can't read this. I'll have to get close myself to read it. But then if you look at bison management intensity and bison management complexity, those places where you have totally fenced populations and you're into intense culling, they take a lot more intensity in management. But then if you have these unfenced free-ranging herds without prescribed herd demographics managed through hunting, a lot less complexity and a lot less intensity. So anyway, that's the kind of things we looked at, and then we graphed those out. And we ended up with some outliers down here. Teddy Roosevelt, I can't remember these others, which are, then you have, up here you have, what we basically had is 3 different groups. This group up here is Yellowstone and Grand Tetons National Elk Refuge. And here you've got Wichita Mountains, you get, this is actually Teddy Roosevelt there, Badlands, Wind Cave. And this group here is the predominant model, which is managed intensively, where you're culling animals, you're rounding them up every year, you're selling animals or giving them to, sending them to slaughter, or, they've also been sending a lot to the tribes. But that's a lot of effort, and it costs a lot of money. And so the other model is that Yellowstone, Grand Tetons, and National Elk Refuge, they've got kind of a hybrid model where they have some hunting, when the bison go out to Gardner and different places like that, they have some hunting there. National Elk Refuge has some hunting that Wyoming Fish and Game actually manages, or is it Game and Fish? I better not say it wrong. But anyway, there's some management there. And then there was the Grand Canyon, which kind of doesn't fit into the group there. I'll talk a little bit about that more later. But then you have the Book Cliffs and Henry Mountains, which fall into that less dominant model. which is free-ranging, low intensity, low complexity, and really doesn't cost a lot to manage them. So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's kind of what we looked at. And so the bottom line was we talked about what is best for the ecological restoration of bison. So, and what the group felt was strongly is this underrepresented model of the large landscape, low density, managed through hunting, low management intensity, shared stewardship is another, or that was the model that allowed for natural processes. So anyway, make sense? Okay. So, anyway, what are the challenges to managing bison as wildlife? And in Utah, they're just like deer, elk, anything else. We do have kind of a hybrid thing though, that if people buy them, they can have captive herds, but they can't, they have to be fenced in. We have some of that, but in Utah, it manages wildlife, but the thing you have to recognize, like Dax has already said, that they're bison are going to be bison, they're gregarious, they're nomadic grazers, and they're not contained by typical rangeland fences. We had some bison getting into Capitol Reef National Park, and even though the bison is on their logo, they said bison are not native to our park, even though they're bones that have been taken from there. There's a pictograph maybe 20 miles from the park, but we've since rectified that. But they didn't want bison down there because they had cattle on their park. I guess I should remember this to be taped. Sorry. But anyway, the superintendent there, it's great to work with, and we worked through all these things. But anyway, we wanted to keep the bison out of the park, so we went in and we built what we call a swinging panel, fence going through a gully, and we had a fence we put next to it in a kind of a little slot canyon. It was 8 foot high, and it was made out of lodgepole pines, and it was stout. And that was okay. That stood at the test of time. But the swinging panel, it was we had 1x4 slats, and it was hung on 3/8-inch cable across this gully. And we came back, and it was down, and it was upstream. And we just figured some bull got a hold of that and just pulled it upstream. And we thought, well, we'll just go hang it back up. That thing weighed a couple of tons. So they're strong, and it obviously didn't work. But we found a way to resolve that problem with the adaptive management too. We ended up hiring a herder, somebody with one of the livestock producers' sons actually. He came in with this horse, and we hired him to chase bison out of they were actually getting down into an alfalfa field on a neighboring ranch at that point, and so he helped us there. So the adaptive management worked. But anyway, that's going to be a challenge. Also, they compete with livestock for forage, and it's really difficult to obtain social support, as Dax has already talked about. That's, you've experienced that here in Montana. We have the same issues, and it doesn't go away. Especially in Utah, we aren't blessed with the moisture you guys have up here, and the water, and drought happens like 7 out of 10 years, and so every time it's a drought, we've got problems, and we have to work on it. So that's another one of the challenges we have. In some states, bison are classified as livestock, which really complicates things. And again, the trade-off between density and large-scale ecology is something else you have to be aware of. So how do we manage bison in Utah? First off, social acceptance is essential. You cannot exclude everybody. So like Dax already mentioned with the bison group on the book cliffs, they had a committee, they met and worked through the issues. But at the same time, we were trying to do one on the Henry Mountains to increase the objective, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But I originally decided, well, we're going to have 15 people, and 2 people from 2 livestock producers, 2 landowners, 2 sportsmen's representatives, 2 non-consumptives, and a couple people from the BLM, a nice, tidy committee. Went to the first meeting, and there were like 24 people there with cowboy boots and black hats on. Well, there's 1 or 2 white hats. But we just decided at that moment that we're just going to open up to anybody. If somebody's got a concern, if we don't work through it, this isn't going to happen. So we opened the door up to everybody. Forage, as Dax already said, is allocated through the BLM Resource Management Plan process. And the bison are allowed to range freely. There are no fences that work. So, and that's something with actually there are fences that work. If you look at Custer State Park, or even out here at the National Bison Range, you know, an 8-foot high tensile fence is going to work. But that's also very expensive. But as far as free ranging, you know, out in these areas where these bison, they have just the typical livestock fences, and they are not going to contain bison. Also, we have long-term vegetation monitoring. On both Henry's and the Book Cliffs, we have what we call a range crew, and it's a cooperative agreement between us, the BLM, and the Forest Service, and they go around and monitor the range. So we manage based on forage conditions, and it's really essential. Also, we do habitat projects to improve conditions for bison and livestock. Both Dax mentioned some of the projects that they've done the Book Cliffs. Our watershed initiative last year, restoration initiative last year, we spent about $27 million on different habitat projects. On the Henry Mountains itself, we've done about over 100,000 acres in habitat treatments at a cost of over $1 million. So that's important, and livestock benefit just as much as wildlife do. Bison herd is controlled through a combination of hunter's choice and cow-only permits. So what we do is we have, like on the Henrys, we have on average about 90 permits per year. About 45 of those go to the hunter's choice. So a hunter can either take a bull or a cow, and so 94% of those take bulls, of course. But the other 45 permits go to cow-only hunters, and you have to take the cow. So we have an orientation. Right now it's online. I used to teach that course. Also, brucellosis is monitored through samples collected by hunters. On the Book Cliffs, we do gather some. We go up and catch some with helicopters and draw blood. But as soon as we get enough hunters out there where we can get a good sample, then we'll just go to hunter samples. But we test our bison every year for brucellosis, and so far we've been brucellosis free. We do an annual helicopter survey. We also had a 6-year research project on the Henrys where we looked at siteability. And anyway, if I get talking too long, let me know. Then we model our population based on that research. So, again, social acceptance is very important. If you look at what they did in Alaska, the Chitina River, St. Wrangell's, in Arizona with House Rock, Grand Canyon. Here in Montana, there have been extended efforts on getting the public involved. Alaska, Arizona, and Utah have been successful in getting, building these coalitions together. And I know Arnie Dude and others here in Montana and Kip have worked really hard, and hopefully those things are coming together now. Anyway, that's probably going to sit on that. I already talked about forage allocation. I guess I would mention this, though, that in both the Henrys and the Book Cliffs, livestock forage, forage from livestock grazing permits or the animal use months has been purchased by conservation groups just for willing sellers. We never, we only work with willing sellers if the landowner or producer wants to sell their permit, we'll do it, but that's not something that we go in and actually as a state agency, we're prohibited from being involved in that process. This is something that conservation groups need to do. And I guess I should back up and say that, in Utah, Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife and Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Nature Conservancy have been very supportive, and without them, we would have never pulled these things off. So it's just something that's really important. But anyway, it's just from willing sellers, and Kip's familiar with that process. Dax has already talked about water. We've spent a lot on wells as well, and those kind of things. Distribution. One thing you have to really keep in mind with bison management is hunting is going to severely change their behavior. So here's one of the things we have that you don't have. And you drive through Yellowstone, you have traffic jams where you're at 200 bison coming down the road. People love it, getting out, taking pictures of them with their cell phones, whatever. But, at the National Wild Bison Range today, we saw some bison there, they were pretty content just to sit there in the riparian areas, stay where they were, let the cars go by. And I tell you what, if you drive down on the Henry Mountains Cut, in fact, Keith on came down, wanted to see some bison on the Henrys. We drove like all day, couldn't find him one. I don't think he believed we even had him. Finally, we found him about 3 miles away out in the desert. But if you drive down there, within a half mile, they'll be running from the truck. You don't just, you can get to the places where you can see them, being upwind or whatever, and you have some really neat experiences that way. But they are wild. Just think of elk. You know what? Elk are hunted here in Montana. Just think how they behave. That's how our bison behave. It's nothing like we saw here today. So their distribution is going to be affected by hunting, and so you have to also manage your pressure. So you don't push them places where you don't want them to go. Anyway, I think that about covers that. Talked about that already. Grand Canyon is also an example. Down at the House Rock herd on Grand Canyon right now, they're having problems in Grand Canyon because the bison found out that they're safe there. They had Arizona Game and Fish has a hunting program for bison out on House Rock, and now almost all the bison are in Grand Canyon. So this year they just completed an EIS, I believe, where they are actually going to authorize target. What do they call them? But they're kind of like they're sportsmen that they're going to authorize to go in and be sharpshooters. That's what they're called, sharpshooters. And so they're going to go in, a group of them will go in for a week, kill as many bison as they can in the park and pack them out. And that's actually, I think, open for applicants right now, or it was just a month or so ago. So anyway, so I already talked about habitat monitoring, talked about that as well. So, I already mentioned Utah, Wyoming, Montana, Alaska, and Arizona all have, are involved in this, these states are involved in bison management. And that's kind of the difference with if you take a look at all of these, with every one of these situations, you have either a free-ranging herd or what we're calling, an almost free-ranging herd, like the Grand Teton, and also Yellowstone. Yellowstone's really free-ranging, but it's being as far as being managed just by hunting, it's obviously not that. So anyway, there's state involvement in all those processes right now. So I just talked a little bit about the Henrys. This one was a transplant that was done back in 1941. We're really lucky that it was done clear back then. And what happened is there was a group called the Carbon Emery Wildlife Federation. I believe they were an affiliate of the National Wildlife Federation. There was a guy named Bill Goatsman. He just thought, man, we got to have bison down here in the San Rafael Desert. And he also heard that there was bison available from Yellowstone National Park. So he got together with the livestock producers down on the San Rafael and said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we had bison down there? And he said, yeah, that'd be, they came to an agreement, have about 100 bison, and that'd be all right. Got with the Fish and Game Department back then, so the Utah Fish and Game, and also the United States Grazing Service, which is now the BLM, came up with an agreement and went to Yellowstone and loaded up 15 cows and 3 bulls and took them down to the San Rafael Desert. The San Rafael Desert's kind of unique. It's pretty flat and has Indian rice grass. That year at least, they're about that high, but that's not always the case. Those bulls, those 3 bulls decided, this doesn't look like Yellowstone, and they scattered. So the next year they had to go get 5 more bulls, and they were released in 1942. So the original release was up there in the San Rafael Desert. Within 10 years, they moved down to the Burr Desert. And then started during the summers, they ranged up onto the Henry Mountains, which is a sky island, granite-based mountain range in south central Utah. Ranges from about 4,500 feet up to about over 11,000 feet. And they basically use kind of that east face, and then they go back into the desert during the winter. This gives you a graph of what the population has done over that time. It took them, they grew slowly at first, up to about the 1970s. It took that long before we had over 100 animals, but they took off from that point. And now we've had several times where they've exceeded 500. We have a population objective of 325 adults postseason. If you add in the calves, that translates to about 440 bison on average. And so we try to keep them at objective. That doesn't always happen, but we do our best, and we're getting better at it. With GPS collars and the technology available now, it's become easier. Anyway, this is a really important graph right here. I apologize, it's hard to see. But anyway, what this shows is that from 1949, when we started our first bison hunt, to 2015, if I update this, it'll even be more. We have had almost 3,000 hunters get permits to hunt bison on Henry Mountains, on 300 bison. So just look at that production. We've had almost 3,000 people be able to draw a once-in-a-lifetime permit to go harvest a truly wild bison. There's been about, I believe it's about 1,200 bulls, and well, it's more than that probably. We average about 95% success on the Ernest Choice permits, about 70% on the cattle permits. Some of the major things that have happened, when the bison were brought from Yellowstone, the majority of them were inoculated with, against brucellosis. And through our hunter testing, we had several that showed a positive titer. I've talked to the veterinarians who were involved in it. They just believed it was just because of the inoculation, the antibodies they built up. But so we went in and rounded all, well, I wasn't there, my dad was, but they rounded all the bison up into a pen using a helicopter and tested all of them. And they had 11 that showed positive titers, again, probably just from the inoculations, but they had all those removed by sportsmen. They flagged, or they marked them, and they were removed by sportsmen. We had a major change in the bison behavior from that time. Instead of using the bird desert, they moved over to the east side of or the west side of the Henrys during the winter, and it's totally changed their behavior there. You can see other things that happen, over time. The population objective was raised from 200 to 275, and now it's up to 325. I already mentioned the hunting permits, but another major thing happened in 2003. I was a wildlife manager in Price, and the BLM called us up and said, "Hey, we've got a severe drought. We've got some real problems. If you have a way to help us, let us know." And so at the same time, one of our conservation groups, Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife, heard about a grazing permit that was for sale, and they went in and purchased that, and it was for about 2,500 AUMs, and that opened up the door for us to consider increasing the objective to 275. Also in 2003, we had a 42,000 acre burn, and that really improved habitat for everything, both livestock and bison. So anyway, based on everything that happened, that's when the proposal came to increase the objective. So we did like Dax just talked about, and we got together a group, and we met for 2 years, and have you ever been stuck in a conversation? We met every other month for 2 years, and we talked about the same thing. It took us 2 years. I was a facilitator, and I must have been lousy, but it took us like 10 months to just figure out what the issues were, to agree on the issues. We finally got through that, and we had the script I described earlier about, mostly the livestock producers in the area. But we finally came to an agreement, okay, we're gonna do this based on these things, and we went out to our public input process. And we have 5 regional advisory councils, and as we started to go through the different places in the state, the livestock producers got up at every one and opposed it, even though they were on the committee. And it was getting pretty intense. And finally, by the time we're down in Green River, which is my region, the wildlife section chief at the time grabbed me and said, Bill, said, what's going on here? Why aren't these guys supporting us? We've talked about it. He says, I'll tell you what, you get this fixed tonight, or I'm pulling it from the agenda. We had one more rank to go, failed at every one so far. And so I went and grabbed the livestock producers that were there after they'd already gotten them posted, and I said, meet me in the parking lot. Well, you gotta realize, they were all like Dax's size. And Wade Paskett, the biologist, worked with me, he's like this size, so we were a little, but they're good guys. So we went out there, met in the parking lot, and underneath the street light in Green River, Utah, we kicked rocks together and we talked about what was the problem, what's the problem here? And, okay, well, what's the problem? And finally they said, well, we think you're trying to put us out of business. Trying to put you out of business. So what is it you want? They said, well, we want our kids to be able to carry on being livestock producers on the Henry Mountains after we retire. We're okay with that. And what else do you want? Well, we want to make sure the integrity of the range is maintained, because if we don't have good range conditions, we don't have anything. We're okay with that. It took that talk to get down to what is the core, what is the root thing that we're all after. We had to find our common ground, what we could agree on. And it took getting out into that parking lot, and when things were really intense, to finally get to that point. The rest of the time we were just going around and beating about the bush. So once we got to that point, I said, okay, well, we'll think about it. But we came with an agreement there, and we decided to keep going, and actually Vernal the next night passed, I believe. But anyway, so in the meantime, we had 2 years of really bad counts. We just had the fire, and bison all gone into the trees, and they were really hard to find, even at a helicopter. You think something big and dark brown like that would be easy to find, but we just couldn't find it. We had 2 years of really bad counts. We counted like 215 one year, and the next year it was like 162. They thought, man, we must have some disease going on. We weren't finding dead animals. So we thought, what's going on here? So after we had this meeting in the parking lot, like 2 days later, we went and we did our summer helicopter count. Wayne and I did it, well, and a couple others of the biologists there, and we counted 600. The director said he was going to, right, we're going to see that on film. But, so, what are we going to do? So, we got together with Kent Hersey, who's one of our big game project biologist at the time, and the big game coordinator. We got together, and we came up with a plan. And said, we've got to get this fixed. And so we agreed. First thing is, we cannot increase the objective on the Henrys or we can't, move to the increased objective until we get to the current objective, which is 275. That was the first thing we agreed to amongst ourselves, and then we came up with a 3-year plan to get there, because there was no way. Remember, going back to where I talked about our hunting pressure, effects distribution, well, we'd have pushed them to another state if we had tried to put 300 hunters out there 1 year. And that's what it probably would have taken to get back to objective, because we end up having 3 years of 161 permits per year to get down to objective. So we came up with that plan. We called the livestock producers. We told them what happened. And so we went to the wildlife board meeting. We have our regional advisory councils, and we have our wildlife board meeting. We went to the board meeting, and we got up there, and the first thing we did is said, hey, we have to have an emergency session here because we've been miscounting bison and Henrys, and the livestock producers. And told us we were miscounting them. And, we just thought we'd see what we'd see. So it took some humility on our parts to recognize we were wrong and that they were right. And so we talked to them, we said, hey, we were wrong, and this is what we're going to do about it. And then we presented the plan after that, and it was amazing at that wildlife board meeting, every one of them, we had 4 of the most ardent, well, we had 4 of the producers there, and they all got one by one and said, this plan isn't perfect, but it's the best we have, and we support it. And so we increased the objective to 325, but we did not increase the number of bison until we got back down to objective. And so those are the kind of hard discussions and the hard things you need to do to make something like this work. You've got to be honest with each other. You've got to listen to each other. And it's hard. Bison management is difficult, but that's what it takes. So anyway, I already talked about all that. We met in the parking lot, created a mutual purpose, discovered the meeting, admitted we were over objective, got the herd under objective before, we actually went under objective before we raised it, and then we followed through our promises. We funded that project for $600,000 to learn how to get better, and that actually was huge, and I sat there and I was like, this was a different talk than I was going to give, so apologize about that. So anyway, the factors that led to success, Dax already talked about these things somewhat. I guess I will back up right here. One of the things that helped us get back to objective, though, is we were 85 or 79 bison to the Oak Cliffs, and so that really helped. Anyway, legal designation of wildlife is critical. To have hunting as a management tool. If you're going to have free-ranging bison, you've got to have hunting as a tool to do it. Last summer, I was at Fort Collins, at a meeting with the Department of Interior. We were looking at population viability analysis on bison, and we talked about, what it costs to manage bison, and all these federal refuges, zero crime. We don't have any budget, we can't call and get, the tribes are asking, well, how many bison are you getting to get out to us this year? Well, we don't have any money to do it, and going on, and and it's costly to do all that. So they asked, well, in Utah, how do you guys do it? Well, sportsmen pay for it through hunting licenses. And that's really a great model. And and as you can see, it's given a lot of opportunity, and it's been an awesome thing for us. But anyway, I just want to drive home the fact that shared stewardship, we all have a role. And federal agencies are integral to this because they have the responsibility to manage habitat, or they are the landowner, and so they've got to be driving that part of it. The tribes fall into the same suit. They can manage populations on their tribal lands. But if you think about it, the one thing that makes it work in Utah and in Alaska and in the places where it's working in Wyoming and even here in Montana and down in Arizona is the state is able to bridge the gap between all the different groups. I mean, we're not the land manager, but we are the wildlife manager. And so we get all of the groups together, and we are the ones that are in the position to help people come to consensus and then have the legal authority to carry it on. So that's why I think that if we're going to have the ecological restoration of bison, we need to get to those low intensity, low complexity populations, free ranging, managed through hunting, and the states are the key to lead that effort. So anyway, that's really all I have to say. Any questions for either one of us, I guess?
Are you comfortable with the genetic diversity of the herd, or are you looking at still?
Okay. Okay. The question was, are we happy with the genetic diversity that we have? We have two different problems. First off, the Henry Mountains is one of the few genetically pure herds, or ones that shows no signs of cattle integration, came from Yellowstone. And so from that standpoint, we were very pleased with the Henry's herd. The Book Cliffs herd, on the other hand, the ones we introduced came mostly from the Henry Mountains, but they've intermingled with the Ute tribal herds. So the bottom line is, when you look at genetic analysis of that, the Book Cliffs has very high genetic heterogeneity. It's one of the highest because those bison came from lots of different sources. But it also has it's pretty high in the percentage of animals. I wouldn't say high, but it's one of the higher herds in the amount of cattle gene integration. The Henry Mountains, on the other hand, has been there since 1941. The only supplement it's had was in 1942. So it's genetically pure, but it is one of the lowest in heterogeneity. So what we put in our management plan to compensate for that, which the geneticists say will work, is we're going to do supplemental introductions of bulls every so often. So, but that's something we need help, especially here in Montana. A couple of years ago, we asked for some from Yellowstone, and that was turned down. But we'd love to get some from here and take them to Kansas.
With the ranchers you were dealing with, what was their main specific concern within the broad umbrella? Was it more the forage competition, busting fences, weeds?
Yes.
All of the above?
Yeah, mainly it was, the biggest concern was competition on winter ranges. The summer range is actually pretty productive down there, but there's a lot of competition on the winter range, and the bison do what they do, and they like to get in big groups on flat areas, and so they go down into the winter range in July for the rut. And so they're taking a lot of the forage out that those livestock producers were depending on for the winter. And then the fence issues as well.
So you found, since you introduced them, that they have been taking that forage that the ranchers are needing?
Well, let's put it this way, okay? Let me try to phrase this the right way, try to figure out how to explain it. There's a lot more cattle than there are bison on the Henrys, for example. 5 times as many, something like that. I don't know the exact numbers. And so it's a matter of distribution. So there's an ample forage on the Henrys for all the animals. But sometimes the problem is they want to use the same places. So it's more of a distribution than it is the amount of forage. And so right now we're trying to work through that by we're trying to come up with a cooperative grazing management plan. It's a real process. It's going to be very similar to the whole process we've been through. But we're actually in the middle of negotiations about that right now, trying to figure out how to move cattle, have the ability to move cattle into areas where bison aren't using, or if they move, where we can change things around. So it's pretty complex, but we've got some situations in northern Utah now where they just implemented a cooperative grazing scheme on an entire watershed, and it's actually probably going to work out really well. That's the same kind of thing we're working for. So we need to look more at ecosystem management with everything involved. That's what we're trying to do.
One of the questions you asked at the beginning was, can we take the fences down?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not certain I caught the answer to that in your talk, but in relation to the question about cattle, how many cattle are grazing on the Henry Mountains as compared to, you said the 400 and, I don't know.
140. Well, there's about 3,000 mother cows and their calves that are permitted, but they don't turn out with their full numbers. So I don't know, it's probably closer to 2,000, and then we have about 450 or so bison.
Can you take the fences down?
Well, I think the answer to that is, depending on what kind of fence you're looking at, it's a twofold process. If you look at the fences at the National Bison Range or at Custer State Park, we're looking at managing bison on an ecological basis. Yeah, we can take those down in suitable areas. You can't everywhere. I mean, I don't think you can up here with all the private land around or something like that. But like in the Book Cliffs, you get 1.2 million acres, public land, about 2% of it's private.
That's 3%.
3%. So it works, I mean, there's still fences around the private land there, but you can't take down all fences. It's just kind of a metaphorical thing I was proposing, but you don't use fences to manage bison like you have to in some of these intensive places like the National Bison Range. So I hope that answers your question. You can't take them all down.
There's a group that came to the law school about, I don't know, 3-4 weeks ago called Buffalo Field Campaign. And one thing they advocate is listing the bison under the Endangered Species Act as a threatened species, just certain distinct population segments, I think Yellowstone. For one, it's under litigation in the District of Columbia
Right.
right now. Is there any, what would be the implications of that? I mean, is there any way to manage bison and have, Buffalo Unite Us, which is the title for this talk tonight,
Yeah.
if they're listed as a threatened species under federal law?
In my opinion, that's absolutely the wrong thing to do. Instead of being divisive, we need to unite together. And all the listing would do was, require the federal government to come in and mandate, you're gonna have to do this, have to do that in order to recover the species. If you look at, grizzly bears, Utah prairie dog, or many species, recovery has been an elusive goal. It has been unable to be attained in many situations. In my career, I've been a non-game biologist. I started out working in non-game and worked with peregrine falcons and bald eagles. And at that time, back in the 80s, the Endangered Species Act worked really well. I mean, if you look what happened with peregrine falcons, we found out what the problem was. It was DDT. We went to work, we joined up with, the Peregrine Fund and other groups to go and release peregrines on hack sites. In Utah, we had a recovery goal of 10 nesting pairs to meet recovery. Well, in 1992, one of my Cecils and I went out in southeastern Utah along the Colorado and Green Rivers, and we found 107 nesting pairs of peregrine falcons. And it was within years, just a couple of years, that the peregrine was delisted. I don't remember if it's downlisted first or delisted, been a while. But anyway, it is delisted now. And so there was a different paradigm back then. Now we have the Equal Access to Justice Act. And there's so much suing and settling that wolf recovery, we had a goal of, 10, 10 packs in the three different areas, up here in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, it was original recovery goal. And because of, legislating through the courts, because of this constant sue and settle situation we have now, it's become difficult to resolve anything through ESA. So I would say, we've got an example of how to do this. Let's just get together. I mean, I was talking with Kip, you've got to find out what everybody needs. You can't exclude anybody. I mean, if there's somebody who doesn't want it, find out why. Well, I teach another course where we talk about avoiding the sucker's choice. What's the sucker's choice? Well, we can have bison or we can have cows. You can have this or you can have that. Why don't we ask the question about how can we have bison and how can we have a viable domestic livestock production? And look at it from that angle. Instead of looking for obstacles, look at how do we resolve it. And that's what it takes. It takes getting into the parking lot and kicking rocks. So looks like I've been too wordy.
Maybe one last question, and then we can ending up here shortly.
Thanks for your presentation. I wanted to ask a question going back to Dax's presentation. So either one of you are probably qualified to answer it. And I was wondering if you'd provide just a very brief view of how the Ute Nation manages their bison herd, and then what is actually involved in cooperative management across this boundary between these two governments.
Yeah, the Ute tribe has an active bison management program. They do aerial survey every year to count their bison. They, at this time, don't issue any bison hunting permits to non-tribal members. At one point they did, they don't anymore. And they have a population objective, they manage towards that objective. They don't get a lot of harvest information, and so I work with their biologist pretty regularly, and it's a challenge for her to model her population or know what's happening other than based on their counts, and because they don't get a lot of harvest data back. But they're committed to making range improvements. They're taking some efforts to reduce wild horse numbers on tribal lands. They, as I mentioned in my talk, they do not like it when the bison leave tribal trust lands and then are hunted by state hunters. Within the larger area, though, there is a Supreme Court rule that the Ute tribe retains some hunting and fishing rights on some of the lands in that area that were historically part of a larger reservation. So when we do issue permits, we issue a proportion of those permits to the tribe based on the tenets of our agreement, our cooperative wildlife management agreement that we have with the Ute tribe. So tribal members are issued permits whenever we have a hunt that goes through the state draw. We also issue permits to the Ute tribe that they allocate to tribal members. So maybe that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm just curious on like kind of what that actual cooperation looks like and how you mesh, or what those paradigms across that boundary. So the off-reservation hunting, is that under tribal regulations then?
On their tribal trust lands on reservation, they have 100% management authority. Everything we do is regulated by the tribal game board and the tribal council. It's these bike hunts that we administer, the state administers, that are off of the tribal trust lands, were contained within areas that at one time were part of a larger reservation that I think the legal term they call Indian country. And so on the Indian country lands, some permits are issued to the tribe based on a cooperative management agreement that we have with the tribe.
Thank you.
Well, should we thank people for speakers?
And again, anybody who wants to hear more and interact more, please feel free to join us tomorrow up in Polson at Pawtucket. And if you have any questions about the program, just ask us. We'll tell you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.